It was a calm evening in Rome, too calm for what was about to happen. The city that had once welcomed him with open arms now stood silent, watching from behind curtains and cafe windows. Yaman was leaving Italy. No headlines had prepared fans for this moment, no tabloid hinted at how emotional it would be. But those who were there that night will never forget it. For years, Italy had become more than a country to him. It was where he found himself again, where he built a new life after the whirlwind of fame in Turkey. It was where people stopped calling him just an actor, and started calling him Arkan. He spoke the language, lived among them, shared their culture, and gave interviews where his eyes sparkled with gratitude. But behind that sparkle, there had always been something else, a quiet sadness that now finally showed. That evening, as he stepped out of his apartment in the heart of Rome, there was a weight in his walk. His steps were slow, as if every corner of the street held a memory. The cold air brushed against his face, but it wasn't enough to hide the warmth of the tears gathering in his eyes. For once, he didn't hide behind sunglasses or a hood. Tonight, he wanted to feel everything, the end of a chapter, the goodbye to a place that had given him both joy and pain. Waiting at the corner was someone the cameras didn't expect. A woman, elegant, quiet, and visibly trembling. She wasn't a stranger. She was the one he had shared countless nights with, the one the magazines had tried to guess but never truly identified. For months, they had drifted apart, living separate lives under the same Italian sky. But tonight, as he prepared to leave, there were no walls left between them. When their eyes met, she smiled weakly. He didn't speak. Neither of them did. And then it happened, the hug that would be remembered forever. It wasn't a goodbye between two lovers who had simply grown apart. It was the kind of embrace that happens when both know that love still exists, but life has already decided otherwise. His hands trembled as he held her. Her face pressed against his shoulder, her tears soaking through his coat. The silence was louder than any words. In that moment, Rome stood still. The traffic, the noise, the city lights, everything faded away, leaving only the two of them in their world of unspoken emotion. After what felt like forever, Ken whispered something in her ear, so softly that even those standing nearby couldn't hear. She nodded, wiped her face, and smiled, a broken, bittersweet smile. Then, without looking back, he turned away. The cameras captured just a few seconds of that scene, but the truth behind it was much deeper. For Ken, this wasn't just a farewell to a woman. It was a goodbye to Italy, to a version of himself that no longer existed. Before that final night in Rome, before the tearful goodbye and the trembling hug, there was another story, one that began years ago, in a way neither of them expected. When Yaman first arrived in Italy, he wasn't looking for love. He came for work, for a new beginning, for silence after the storm of fame in Turkey. But Italy had its own plans for him. It started with the charm of the streets, the warmth of the people, and the endless curiosity that surrounded him wherever he went. In the beginning, he felt like a visitor, a foreigner trying to adapt. He would walk through Trastevere with his headphones on, listening to Italian just to learn the rhythm of the language. He found comfort in small things, a coffee in the same cafe every morning, conversations with locals who treated him not as a star, but as a neighbor. Slowly, he became part of Rome's daily life, and the city began to feel like home. It was during that time that he met her. She wasn't famous. She didn't care about fame, followers, or cameras. She cared about silence, honesty, and presence. The very things Ken had been missing. They met during a charity event, organized to help children in need. She was volunteering quietly in the background, unaware that the man standing next to her would one day become the center of her world. He noticed her not because of her beauty, though she had that, effortlessly, but because of how calm she was in the middle of chaos. Their first conversation was brief, but something clicked. She laughed at his Italian, he teased her about her accent when speaking English. From that day, their paths began to cross more often. Sometimes by coincidence, sometimes by choice. They started meeting after events, walking along the Tiber River at night, away from cameras, away from everything. It was in those walks that Ken rediscovered what peace felt like. He wasn't being watched, he wasn't being judged, he was just a man talking to a woman who saw him for who he truly was. Their connection grew quietly, like a secret written in the wind. Soon, even the paparazzi began to notice. Photos started circulating, blurred, stolen moments of laughter and closeness. Magazines speculated, fans obsessed, and suddenly, the privacy they valued so much began to slip away. Still, they tried to protect it. Ken avoided public statements, and she disappeared from social media. But Italy is a country where love stories live on every corner, and theirs became one of them. When he began filming new projects, she was there in the background, never posing, never seeking attention, but always supporting. She was the quiet presence that balanced his fame, the reason his eyes softened whenever he spoke about home. But as his success in Italy grew, so did the distance between their hearts. Fame doesn't just change how people see you, it changes how you see yourself. Between work, travel, and pressure, the simplicity of their love began to fade. Still, neither of them let go. They held on as long as they could, until one day, it was no longer enough. And that's where the real story began, the story that led to that heartbreaking goodbye. In the weeks leading up to his departure, those close to Yaman noticed a quiet shift in his energy. He still smiled for the cameras, still showed up to events in tailored suits and that unmistakable confidence, but when the lights turned off, he was someone else entirely. There was a stillness in him, the kind that comes only when a person has already made a painful decision. Italy had given him everything, and yet, it had slowly taken away the one thing he valued most, peace. He used to say that Italy made him feel alive. But lately, the very streets that once inspired him had begun to feel heavy, full of memories that no longer brought joy. The paparazzi followed him everywhere. Every dinner, every walk, every smile became a headline. He couldn't even go for a drive without speculation about who might be sitting beside him. At first, he laughed it off. He said that fame came with a price. But over time, that price became unbearable. The turning point came quietly, not during a fight, not during a scandal, but in the calm of an ordinary morning. He woke up, looked out his window, and realized he didn't feel at home anymore. The walls that once comforted him now felt like a cage. He wanted air, simplicity, something real again. That was when he knew, it was time to leave Italy. Of course, publicly, he said it was for work. That he was returning to Turkey for new projects, for fresh challenges. But those who knew him best understood there was another truth. A deeper one. His relationship had reached a breaking point. The love that once grounded him had become too complicated, too fragile under the constant pressure of fame. They still cared for each other, maybe they always would, but love alone wasn't enough anymore. There were too many misunderstandings, too many unspoken words. He was chasing new roles, international collaborations, while she wanted a quieter life away from the spotlight. What had once brought them together, their differences, now began to pull them apart. They tried to fix it, tried to hold on through long talks and promises whispered in the dark, but the weight of their world was too much. And yet, when the decision was made, there was no anger. No shouting, no resentment. Just sadness. The kind of sadness that settles in your bones. Ken began preparing for his move quietly, packing little by little, sending boxes ahead, visiting his favorite places one last time. He said goodbye to his team, to friends, to the cafes that had become part of his routine. He smiled, but every smile carried a shadow. Those who saw him during those final days said he was calm, almost too calm. Like someone who had already cried all his tears in private. He refused to let anyone see his pain, except her. That's why, on his last night, he asked her to meet. Not to beg, not to fix things, but to end it the only way he knew how, face to face, heart to heart, without lies. And that's when it happened, the embrace that ended everything and yet somehow said everything. It was a farewell not only to her, but to Italy, to a version of himself that he had outgrown. Behind his departure were not just career choices, but a man's silent plea for peace after years of chaos. That night in Rome didn't feel like any other. The sky was unusually still, the air heavy, as if the city itself knew something was ending. The lights along the Tiber River flickered softly, reflecting on the dark water, quiet witnesses to a farewell that would soon break millions of hearts. Yaman had always been a man of presence, a storm of charisma wherever he went. But that evening, he was different, slower, more fragile, almost unrecognizable to those who once saw him as untouchable. He didn't arrive in a flashy car. He didn't wear designer clothes or a signature smile. He came alone, wearing a dark coat, his hair slightly messy, eyes tired from sleepless nights. He stopped for a moment before stepping out of the car, taking a deep breath, as if to gather the courage to face what was coming. He wasn't meeting a journalist or a friend. He was meeting her, the woman who had once been his safe place, now the last link to a chapter he didn't want to end. When she saw him, she froze. She had promised herself not to cry, but the moment their eyes met, everything inside her broke. For months, they had avoided this moment, both pretending that time and distance could fix what had already fallen apart. But love doesn't fade quietly, it lingers, it haunts, and tonight, it came back one last time. He walked toward her slowly. She whispered his name, barely audible. He didn't answer, only reached out and pulled her into his arms. That hug lasted longer than it should have, long enough to remember everything, but short enough to remind them it was over. It wasn't the passionate embrace of lovers, it was the quiet, desperate hold of two people saying goodbye while still wishing they didn't have to. She whispered something against his chest, a question, maybe, or a plea. His hands trembled slightly as he replied, "I have to go." The words hit her like glass shattering. She wanted to argue, to say that love could still save them. But deep down, she knew he was right. Italy had become too small for the man he was becoming, too loud for the heart he was trying to protect. The photographers, hidden in the shadows, caught glimpses of the moment, the trembling hands, the tears, the final look before he turned away. By morning, those photos would circle the world, sparking rumors and headlines. But what no one captured was the silence that followed, the silence that clung to both of them long after he walked away. He stopped at the corner, turned for one last look, and saw her standing there. Motionless, her eyes glistening under the streetlights. She smiled faintly, trying to be strong for him. He nodded once, a silent promise, then disappeared into the car that would take him to the airport. The city felt emptier the moment he left. For her, it was the sound of the engine fading into the night that hurt most, not the goodbye, not the tears, but the final realization that this time, he wasn't coming back. And for Can, as the car drove through the sleeping streets of Rome, every light that passed the window reflected a memory, laughter, love, hope, and all the what-ifs he would carry with him forever. That night, Rome lost its brightest light. And the man who once made the city his home left behind not just a country, but a piece of his heart. The morning after his departure, Rome woke up quieter than usual. The cafes opened as always, the bells rang across the city, but something was missing, the familiar energy, the laughter, the presence of the man who had once walked those same streets like they belonged to him. For years, Yaman had been a part of Italy's rhythm, its stories, its dreams. Now, he was gone, and yet, it felt as though his shadow still lingered in every corner. The headlines hit the newsstands before sunrise, Yaman leaves Italy, emotional goodbye stuns fans. Photos of his final hug filled social media, and fans across Europe couldn't hold back their emotions. Comment sections flooded with heartbreak, "Please come back, Italy won't be the same without you, that hug, it broke me." But behind the flood of words and tears, there was a silence that only he and she could understand. As his plane took off from Fiumicino Airport, Ken looked out the window and saw the Italian coastline fading beneath the clouds. For a moment, he thought of turning back, not literally, but emotionally. A part of him wanted to believe that some stories deserve another chance. But deep inside, he knew this was necessary. He had spent years giving the world every piece of himself, to his fans, to his work, to love. Now, it was time to give something back to the one person he had neglected, himself. He didn't know what awaited him in Istanbul. Maybe peace, maybe loneliness, But what he knew for sure was that he couldn't carry on pretending. He needed to rebuild, to rediscover who Yaman truly was when the camera stopped flashing. He thought of her, the woman he left standing on that Roman street, tears falling silently. Her face would stay with him, not as a wound, but as a memory of something real in a world built on illusions. Back in Italy, she too tried to move on. She avoided the news, stayed away from social media, and focused on her work. But every time she walked past the cafe where they used to sit, she felt the emptiness. People whispered his name, and she smiled politely, pretending she was fine. But some nights, when the city went quiet, she would still look at her phone, at his last message, simple and devastating: "Thank you for everything. You made me better." Weeks later, fans spotted Ken in Istanbul, simpler, calmer, different. No entourage, no drama. Just a man walking his dog near the Bosphorus, lost in thought. When asked about Italy, he smiled softly and said, "Italy will always be in my heart." Some chapters end beautifully, even when they hurt. Those words went viral, but they weren't meant for the world. They were meant for her. Because in truth, this wasn't just the story of a man leaving a country. It was the story of love meeting destiny, of two souls who found each other in the right place but at the wrong time. He left, but not everything ended. Some connections don't need distance to survive, they live quietly, beating beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to return. And maybe, someday, when the noise fades and both hearts heal, Rome will see them again. Not as strangers, not as lovers bound by the past, but as two people who once shared something pure in a world that rarely allows such things to exist. For now, though, Italy says goodbye to Yaman. And the echo of that final hug, soft, trembling, unforgettable, remains forever in the air of a city that will never forget him.